As the leader, I didn't have enough accountability. Big mistake. Huge mistake. There was not enough accountability. I was a part of a fellowship of pastors and fellowship of leaders, but fellowship and real leadership and fatherhood and accountability are two different things. And so there was significant autonomy, although we had a tacit connection to these fellowships. And so basically, there was no one that I was answering to directly. Of course, if I had done something significantly stupid or that, yeah, they would have come in. But as far as just day to day, there was nobody that I had to report to. As long as I did what was necessary to fulfill my responsibilities as the senior leader, and the board of directors and all of those things were fine, I was good. Nobody to report to, bad mistake. Here's why. I couldn't see my own blind spots. And every leader has blind spots. No matter how good you are, you can't see your blind spots. You're blinded to them. So I couldn't see things about myself that I needed to see. I couldn't hear things about myself that I needed to hear, and I wasn't accountable to anyone who could provide consequences if I didn't toe the line. See, it's one thing to get advice. It's another thing to be accountable. It's one thing to get mentoring. It's another thing to be accountable. When you are accountable, then that means someone else has the power and responsibility to execute not only guidance, not only wisdom, but to also execute consequence for bad behavior. And so it's important to have those levels of accountability. I didn't have the things that I needed to be in place to protect me from me. Your greatest enemy, if you don't have the personal development that you're supposed to and the personal discipline that you're supposed to, your greatest enemy could be you. Be very careful when you ask, God, deliver me from my enemies. Your greatest enemy could be you. I had nobody to really protect me from myself. And remember, in a previous module, we talked about being productive and being successful. There's some people that the only thing that they gauge and the only thing that they judge is if you are getting the numbers, if you're being successful at what they consider are your business, organizational, religious bottom lines. But that's not real accountability. I needed somebody to not only see what I was producing, but I needed somebody to see who was producing it. I needed somebody to say, check yourself. I needed somebody to see things I couldn't see. I was one of the most mature young people that I knew. As a matter of fact, one of the leaders in our church said, "You're the oldest young man I've ever met in my life." And I was 23, 24. And so I counted on my maturity. I counted on my personal discipline. I was known, and it had been documented, that I had wisdom beyond my years. So that was my foundation. But I couldn't see what I was missing. And because I wasn't accountable to anyone who could execute consequences if I didn't grow, execute consequences if I didn't develop. Maybe that's why it's really, really important to make sure that you have not just mentors, but people who can execute consequences. I didn't allow other people to protect me from myself. Didn't want to hear it from my wife. I didn't have the right friends around me who would actually pull me to the side and say, you need to get better. It's so critical that you have that level of accountability if you are going to be a good leader. But here's a different level of accountability that I want to talk about. It's a second level of accountability. It's the accountability to yourself. To thy own self be true. There came a period, probably in my 30s, when things were crumbling. There came a period where I no longer trusted me. That I had listened to a lot of advisors. I had listened to a lot of people, and their perspective and the advice that they were given was rooted and grounded in what they felt my potential was rooted and grounded in what they felt my present obligations were. And so their perspective and their guidance and their in many cases, the orders they gave me, because there were some people who said, do this. And in my own gut, I knew I should have done differently. But I didn't trust me anymore. I didn't act on what I knew. I lost the courage to just trust me. I started to doubt my own gut. I am known as Bishop Derek Triplett. A bishop, for those of you who are not in the religious sector, is a governmental office. I oversaw other churches. I oversaw other pastors. I still do. But at 31 years old, with everything that was going on in my life, I didn't want to be a bishop. As a matter of fact, when it was first offered to me, I turned it down. I knew I had no business accepting that appointment. But other people who were talking to me, the organization needs you. Your potential is there. We need your mind. We need your creativity. Despite what you've been through, the fact that God would allow this appointment to take place is a validation that He's still with you. I knew it, but I trusted the words of other people because I knew I no longer trusted myself. I knew it. I no longer trusted my gut. I had erased my accountability to myself. I saved leadership, lost my family, lost my marriage. Still have great kids and been a great father, but I lost my marriage. And I knew I should have done differently. But there's another reason that I couldn't do it, which is kind of quasi another mistake. It was tied to my finances. And probably one of the mistakes that I made is that I left corporate America totally in order to be a full-time pastor. And so now my church is also my source of income. So if I'm going to leave my church in order to try to save my marriage, then what am I going to do for income? And a lot of young leaders, especially for those of you who lead in the church, you tie too much of your life to the finances of your church. And I would encourage a lot of you to be bivocational or at least be entrepreneurial so that you can make clear-cut decisions that have nothing to do with finances, so that you can be accountable to yourself in ways that you can't be if you're tied to that particular check. And so I had to reestablish my ability to not only to be accountable to others, but more importantly, or as important, to reestablish my ability to be accountable to myself.